Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Naila Shuja and these are the headlines. In occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Indian troops have martyred another Kashmiri and wounded dozens after they opened fire on peaceful protesters in the Shopian district. They were protesting against the martyrdom of a student, Jahangir Ahmed Vani, in a fake encounter on Sunday. The troops also burned down several houses and used pellet guns against the residents. Internet services remain suspended in the area to prevent atrocities from being reported. In Afghanistan, at least 15 people have been wounded in an explosion that targeted a bus in Kabul. Police say the bus was carrying government officials. The violence in Kabul follows a pattern of attacks targeting Afghan politicians, officials, and activists. In Myanmar, 6 more protesters have been killed after security forces opened fire on pro-democracy demonstrators. The protesters took to the streets a day after 39 people were killed on the deadliest day since the first February coup. Meanwhile, the ruling military has imposed martial law in 4 more districts of Yangon. Germany has joined several other European countries to suspend the use of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine over blood clot fears. But the World Health Organization has reiterated that there is no link between the jab and the blood clots. The decision could delay the European Union's inoculation drive against the virus, which has infected nearly 120 million people worldwide. More than 2.6 million, including 13,537 in Pakistan, have died. At the Dubai Tennis Championship, resurgent Japanese star Kai Nishikori fought from a set down to beat big serving American Riley Opelka 2-1. Meanwhile, Joe Wilfried Tsonga's injury woes continue as the Frenchman was forced to retire from his opening round match against Malik Jaziri. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. In the Shopian district, the troops also burned down several houses and used pellet guns against the residents. A 22-year-old man lost his sight after being hit with a pellet gun. Internet services remain suspended in the area to prevent atrocities from being reported. The killing of innocent Kashmiris in fake encounters has been going on for the last many months. 3 innocent Kashmiris were martyred by Indian troops last year in July, while another 3 lost their lives in a fake encounter in December. The bodies of the martyred were never handed over to their families, but India has failed to snatch the Kashmiri spirit of independence despite the ongoing atrocities. In India, farmers have camped along Delhi borders for 110 days now, despite more than 250 deaths. They have ruled out suspension of their movement until the centre's contentious laws are reappealed. Canadian YouTuber Lily Singh used the global stage of the Grammy Awards to highlight the agitation. She arrived on the red carpet wearing a black mask that read, "I stand with the farmers." Earlier, the governor of the Indian state of Meghalaya, Satya Pal Malik, said that none of the 3 laws favor farmers. Speaking in Uttar Pradesh, the governor urged Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah not to use force against the farmers. In Afghanistan, at least 15 people have been wounded in an explosion that targeted a bus in Kabul. Police say the bus was carrying government officials. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. The violence in Kabul follows a pattern of attacks targeting politicians, officials, and activists in recent weeks amid ongoing intra-Afghan talks in Doha. The United States has unveiled a draft peace plan for Afghanistan ahead of May 1st deadline for the withdrawal of foreign troops under the Doha Agreement. The formation of an inclusive interim setup and a United Nations-led conference in Istanbul next month are part of the plan. U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad met Qatar's foreign minister and Taliban leader Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar to discuss the recent developments. Russia has also summoned a meeting of regional countries, including Pakistan, to this week's talks in Moscow. The Taliban and Kabul have confirmed that they will participate in the upcoming meeting. Pakistan and Iran have stressed on the need to promote regional cooperation to help establish peace in Afghanistan. This was discussed during Pakistan's envoy for Afghanistan, Mohammad Sadiq's meeting with Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif in Tehran. The two sides also reviewed the latest developments, including the process of peace talks in Afghanistan. Zarif said Iran backs peace in Afghanistan and achievements gained by Afghan people must be preserved. Sadiq elaborated Pakistan's stance on the latest developments in Afghanistan. Earlier in a meeting with Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, both sides voiced concerns regarding the rise of ISIS in Afghanistan. Pakistan's ambassador to Iran, Rahim Hayat Qureshi, said the two sides agreed on the necessity of joint efforts for peace and stability in the region. Iran has told the United Nations that it has no role, directly or indirectly, in attacks against United States interests in Iraq. Iran's envoy Majid Takhtravanchi conveyed this in a letter to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Rocket attacks hit a military base in Iraq's Erbil last month, killing one foreign civilian contractor and wounding 9 others, including a United States soldier. Several other attacks were launched against U.S. interests in Iraq in the following weeks. In response, U.S. President Joe Biden launched the first military operation of his administration, ordering airstrikes on Iran-backed militias in Syria. According to reports, 22 people were killed in the attack. Iran has denounced the airstrikes as illegal. The United States says it plans to revive diplomatic efforts to end the war in Yemen. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was speaking to the United Nations Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, over the phone. The State Department says Blinken told Griffiths that the United States supports a unified, stable Yemen, free from foreign influence. He asserted that there is no military solution to the conflict. Meanwhile, the Arab coalition says it has destroyed a Houthi drone fired towards the southern city of Saudi Arabia, Khamis Mashahid. This comes as Yemeni forces and the rebels continue battling over the oil-rich Marib Governorate. Syria foils a suicide attack in Damascus, with security forces killing 3 and arresting as many others. The state media said the plot involved the use of explosive belts. Over in the north, missiles and rockets struck fuel tanks near the Turkish border, wounding 2 people. Turkey said that they were fired from a military base in Syria, government-controlled part of Aleppo province. Earlier, Britain sanctioned 6 allies of President Bashar al-Assad, including the foreign minister and advisors. Meanwhile, Syrians are marking the 10th anniversary of the start of an uprising against Assad's government that turned into a civil war. The conflict has killed around 500,000 people and displaced half of Syria's pre-war population of 23 million. In Myanmar, 6 more protesters have been killed after security forces opened fire on pro-democracy demonstrators. The protesters took to the streets a day after 39 people were killed on the deadliest day since the February 1st coup. The ruling military has imposed martial law in 4 more districts of Yangon. Meanwhile, Chinese factories in the Hailing Thaya were looted and destroyed by unidentified assailants. The Chinese embassy described the situation to be very severe, saying Chinese staff were injured and trapped in the attacks. The embassy asked for security to be guaranteed quickly and also warned Chinese citizens in Myanmar. Elsewhere, Japan says it is monitoring Myanmar's coup and considering how to respond to it. Germany has joined the list of the countries that have suspended the use of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine. Meanwhile, the virus continues to ravage Brazil. It has claimed more than 1,100 lives and infected nearly 44,000 people over the past 24 hours. Globally, there are more than 2.65 million deaths and close to 120 million cases. As skepticism surrounding COVID-19 vaccination grows, stronger new waves triggered by potent new mutants of the virus continue to spread. While the United States preps to implement its mammoth $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package, the disease is claiming 1,500 lives on average every day. The situation in Latin America is even dire still, where the virus is battering lives and livelihoods equally hard. Despite reporting the highest daily deaths in the region for nearly 3 weeks now, Brazilians continue to reject restrictions.
Today I'm protesting against Governor João Agripino Doria's dictatorial attitudes. He wants to impose a lockdown on the population, put an end to employment, health, and to put an end to the people of Sao Paulo.
In Europe, too, patience seems to be running out. Police had to intervene to break up anti-lockdown protesters in Netherlands. Italy's Piedmont region has also stopped the use of the Oxford vaccine, adding doubt to the inoculation campaigns across the world. France is once again faced with a decision whether to implement a lockdown or not, as new cases shoot above 26,000. Over in India, new cases are rising again, while poor governance and management have created a food inflation crisis.
The production in some areas, as it is the logistics of getting the food where people want to buy the food. That has been a big problem. In some other areas, the pandemic and the restrictions caused by the pandemic has affected access to essential items.
Meanwhile, Japan is considering limiting spectators at the delayed Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics to half capacity because of the coronavirus risks. Meanwhile, Pakistan has recorded another 29 deaths from COVID-19 and nearly 2,200 cases overnight. The health ministry says more than 13,000 people have died since the pandemic began. Officials say Pakistan's caseload has crossed 607,000, out of which more than 571,000 people have recovered, while the number of active cases has surged past 22,000. Planning Minister Asad Umar said vaccination registration for people aged 50 or above will begin in 10 days. Umar said the third wave is more lethal and the $150 million allocated for the vaccine procurement can be increased if required. Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has asked troops to remain vigilant to combat the changing nature of threats. According to the military's media wing, General Bajwa visited troops of the Lahore Corps. He praised their professionalism and high standards of training. The Army chief was also briefed about operational preparedness for the formation. He was accompanied by Corps Manager Lieutenant General Mohammad Abdulaziz on his visit. Pakistan has joined the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in observing the first ever International Day to Combat Islamophobia. Islamabad presented the resolution to observe the day at the OIC's Council of Foreign Ministers last year. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the OIC's unanimous support for the designation of this day is a reflection of the sentiments of Muslims around the world. The OIC group will hold a high-level event in New York on the 17th of March to mark the occasion. The OIC is now working with the international community to commemorate this day at a global level. A Pakistani diplomat and a United Nations expert have expressed concerns over Sri Lanka's proposed move to ban the wearing of burqas. In a tweet, Pakistan's envoy to Sri Lanka, Saad Khattak, said that the ban will only serve as an injury to the feelings of Muslims across the globe. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion, Ahmed Shahid, tweeted that the burqa bans are incompatible with international law. Sri Lanka announced the plans over the weekend to ban burqas and shut over 1,000 madrasas on security grounds. The wearing of burqas was banned in 2019, soon after Easter Sunday attacks on churches and hotels that killed more than 260 people. This ban was lifted earlier this year after criticism from the United States and international rights groups. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the world still needs to have conversations about racism and white supremacy. She said this while addressing a news conference on the second anniversary of the Christchurch terror attack. Ardern said it was incumbent on New Zealand to get its house in order after the attack. She added the country's Muslim community is experiencing some pretty horrific racism even before. She urged global leaders to fulfill their responsibility for the culmination of hate speech and extremism.
But I would say that actually globally, there are no boundaries really anymore when it comes to, really hateful speech and language. Every leader needs to take into account that their voice can be broadcast anywhere, at any time. Countries need to take that into account. So I think it's for all of us to reflect on what we've seen with those violent extremist attacks since that time.
Meanwhile, the United States said it stands with New Zealand in condemning all forms of terrorism, regardless of ideology. Now moving on, in Australia, thousands have taken to the streets across the country protesting against the sexual abuse and harassment of women. They were spurred by a recent wave of allegations of sexual assault centered on Australia's parliament. The allegations have focused scrutiny on the Conservative government. The protests were organized a week ago after Attorney General Christian Porter revealed he was the subject of a rape allegation in 1988, which he denies. Separately, an ex-politician advisor who alleged in February that she was raped in a minister's office in 2019 also fueled public anger. Protesters feel the government's response to the sexual assault allegations has been inadequate. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have landed in Tokyo to start a 4-day visit of the region. The visit to Tokyo and Seoul is the first overseas trip by the top cabinet members of President Joe Biden's administration. The visit follows last week's Quad Alliance summit of the leaders of the United States, Japan, and Australia, along with India. The officials will discuss freedom of navigation in South and East China Seas, North Korea, and a military coup in Myanmar. They will also make a courtesy call on Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, who is set to meet Biden in April. Both officials will leave Tokyo for Seoul on Wednesday and hold talks with Korean counterparts in the capital until Thursday. At least a dozen villagers have been killed in an overnight raid in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Civil rights groups say men armed with knives and other weapons attacked the village of Bolongo. They blamed the ISIS-linked Allied Democratic Forces, which has been active in eastern Congo since the 1990s. Civil society groups fear the death toll could rise since the militants operated for several hours. Earlier, the United States designated the ADF as a foreign terrorist organization, accusing it of having links to ISIS. Congo's eastern borderlands are home to over 100 different militias, many of which are remnants of the country's civil wars that ended in 2003. Britain's Cabinet Office will set up a second flagship headquarters in Glasgow as the government plans to move some of its operations to Scotland. The decision came at a time when support for Scottish independence is running high. The Foreign Office plans to create 500 new jobs at an existing office in East Kilbride. In a statement, Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said this will bring new jobs and investment to Scotland and strengthen the diversity of the United Kingdom civil service, ending the Westminster knows best approach in policy making. Polls show more people in Scotland support independence than want to remain a part of Britain. The Dutch are voting in a general election seen as a referendum on the government's handling of COVID-19. Roughly 13 million voters are eligible to vote over the next 3 days to choose representatives for the 150-seat House. Pre-poll surveys show Prime Minister Mark Rutte's conservative VVD party set for a comprehensive victory and fourth successive term. The closest contender is the Geert Wilders Freedom Party, known for its Islamophobic and xenophobic views. With a ban on public gatherings, the election campaign instead focused on a series of televised debates. Major parties including Labour, the Green Left, and pro-education Democrats 66 are vying with the center-right Christian Democrats for third place. 6 people, including 5 herdsmen and a child, have died after a heavy dust storm hit Mongolia. The country's emergency management department says rescuers are trying to locate 81 missing people. Neighboring China has also been affected by the dust storm. The capital city of Beijing is shuttered in thick brown dust, limiting visibility and disrupting traffic. China's meteorological agency has issued a yellow alert, calling it the biggest sandstorm in a decade. Flights have been grounded and the air quality has reached a serious pollution level of 6. A giant wooden tower was torched as part of the MASLENITSA folk festival in Russia's western Kaluga region. This year, the structure specially built for burning was named Vaccination Tower, denoting the COVID-19 pandemic.
Millions of Russians celebrate Maslenitsa, or Pancake Week, to mark the end of winter. Maslenitsa week began as a pagan ritual and has been absorbed into the Russian Orthodox Church. The beginning of spring, which was seen as the start of New Year in pagan times, made some festival visitors want to reflect on 2020. Artist Nikolai Politsky said he was inspired to create the 24-meter structure as a hopeful goodbye to the pandemic. Festival visitor Anjania says they are welcoming spring. They burn everything bad and hope for the best, happiness and good health. Another visitor, Art Yom, calls the festival a success and said the organizers were able to put up something unusual.
Almost everything on the Banwal and Bakji Islands in South Korea is purple. The region has become a popular tourist destination. More in this report.
Purple houses, purple cars, people wearing purple clothes, and eating purple rice. These are not scenes out of a movie, but small islands in South Korea that have been tinted purple to attract tourists. The project, which is supported by the country and provincial governments, was inspired by the native balloon flower. These islands have a little over 100 residents, most of which are of early age.
Old people like us have lived a secluded life since all of the young people left town. But after we planted lavender, I'm glad to see young people and kids are coming. They're all like my grandchildren.
Visitors who adhere to the theme color are granted free entry to the island. According to the county office, the campaign has drawn over 487,000 people since it kicked off in 2019.
We could not travel overseas due to COVID-19, so we thought about a local trip instead and found these purple islands. So I'm here with my friends and we're all dressed up in purple. It is amazing and looks like fairy tales and magic. As I'm seeing, the grandmas are all wearing purple clothes. It is very dreamy.
Since 2015, Shinan County has invested $4.25 million to turn the island purple. This included painting more than 28,000 square meters of roofs lilac.
In Nepal, hundreds of climbers are set to return to Mount Everest under strict conditions. The world's tallest peak will be reopening next month after a year's closure amid the pandemic. More in this report.
As the peak climbing season nears, the Sherpas of Nepal prepare to guide aspiring foreign mountaineers to summit the Everest. In April 2019, a record 381 climbers attempted to scale the 8,849-meter mountain.
Our Sherpa climbers are ready, but there are safety issues as they have not received vaccines. Also, some of the climbing staff have gone to the base camp to start preparations.
8 of the world's 14 highest mountains, including Everest, are wholly or partly in Nepal, and foreign climbers contribute millions of dollars in income annually to the cash-strapped nation. Expedition organizers say the Chinese side of Everest, which was shut to foreign climbers last year, will stay closed this season as well, likely meaning that more climbers will be on Nepal's side.
More than 300 foreign climbers have been confirmed to climb Mount Everest. We expect this number to rise as there is still some time left.
Nepal closed its mountains in March last year as part of tight measures against the coronavirus, which has infected over 270,000 people and claimed more than 3,000 lives so far.
Nothing is more painful than a parent's grief of losing their child. A Syrian farmer who did not just lose one, but all 13 of sons, as well as his wife, has found solace with his grandchildren. More in this report.
Tears leave his eyes as Abdul Razak Al-Khatoon looks at a video of the execution of one of his sons. Like many other victims of the Syrian civil war, Khatoon's story is also full of tragedy and grief. In 2011, when protests began against Bashar al-Assad, he and his sons participated as well. However, the demonstrations quickly became violent, and 3 of his sons were killed during the first year. His other sons also died later as the conflict worsened. Afterwards, Khatoon also lost his wife when a rocket hit their home in Hama.
After I went out following the revolution, I lost 3 children, and afterwards I started moving from one village to another until I reached Sarakib. I lost 7 before and another 7 at the gas station, so 13 children, and my wife, Umeyman.
Khatoon, who was once a leading farmer with 1,800 acres of land, has now become penniless. He lives in a tent with his 12 grandchildren and the wives of his dead sons. Even after facing so many tragedies, the 84-year-old still thanks God and is hopeful for better days.
Now I took a piece of land and planted olives. I live in Harbanush inside a tent to look after 12 grandchildren.
Millions more, like Khatoon, have fled their homes for safer areas within Syria or as refugees abroad. His story is an accurate depiction of how the common people have suffered from the rivalry of great powers.
It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. U.S. stocks have opened flat amid caution over rising borrowing costs spurred by massive fiscal stimulus. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index opened fractionally lower, while the tech-heavy NASDAQ Composite rose over 0.25%. The S&P 500 index fell over 0.1% at open. Meanwhile, oil prices fell as China's economic recovery boosted the energy demand outlook. It's now time to take a look at the weather around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at indus.news.